simulcast.
Welcome, Comic Book Conservation Live Show episode. Can you believe it, guys? 24.
4 episodes. That's crazy.
Coming to you on this holiday weekend with a great show. A lot of action, a lot to get through. I'm super pumped, and I'm having an alcoholic beverage.
I can't do that. Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll have an extra one for you. I'll drink enough for both of us.
Okay, yeah, I had a Mai Tai last night and then I passed out. So
Very nice. You gotta have a Mai Tai when you're in Honolulu.
yeah, it's required.
So, how have y'all been? How's the week been?
Good. You know, Phil and I are, I think, on holidays.
Yeah.
So I'm in Honolulu right now. Got the family vacation going on, and I see Phil is not in his normal location.
No.
He does have comics stacked behind him, though.
I
guess
did notice
that's either
that.
his mom's or his dad's comic book collection, I
It's
assume.
my dad.
Yeah, must
Yep.
be.
Yeah,
Nice.
it's in my dad's books.
Phil, tell the people where they can find you.
On Instagram at Phantom Restoration or at www.phantomrestoration.com.
All right. How about you, Captain Larry?
I can be found here on YouTube at Flying L Comics or flyinglcomics.com. Also on Instagram.
So my co-hosts are on the road, but I am from my usual location, undisclosed in the Texas Hill Country, and happy to be here. And happy to be seeing everybody on a holiday weekend.
Yes.
Tomorrow's Labor Day, and I want to say,
is.
I want to talk about Labor Day for a minute. I love that the summer is bookended by these two holidays, Memorial Day and Labor Day, where we honor Americans who have made sacrifices for all of us. And I want to say on Labor Day, thank you to all the people that made sacrifices, including died, to improve workers' rights in this country. And I want to say a special thank you to everybody who continues that fight today, because the work isn't done, and including my dad, who's a union worker. He's a member of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers and also a veteran. So he's just lived a whole life of putting his country and his family first. And I appreciate everybody who's made those sacrifices so all of us can have a better life here in America. So thank you.
As a matter of fact, today here in the hotel workers are on strike for Labor Day. So that made national news. So we had a bunch of picketers outside, but I am also a Teamster.
Yeah,
So I support what they're doing, and I wish them well.
Yeah, you're a union guy.
I am a union guy.
Phil was probably working on organizing all of the comic book conservators and restorers in the country into a union, right? All 6 of you? All 6 of the... how many do you think there are professional in the country, Phil?
Oh, boy.
I would say like 10, maybe 10 to 12.
Wow.
I was thinking both. I can count them on both hands.
Wow.
Yes, it's very close to that. Yeah.
So
but also in varying degrees, some of them are probably retired or getting close to that, because that is for a long time there weren't a lot of newer people coming into it.
Yeah. I work in biotech. It's clinical side, it sometimes is unionized, but in terms of the science tends not to be. But like I said, I'm a big supporter of workers' rights. So great. Well, like I said, we have a lot to do today. Another thing that I want to talk about, another sort of humbling and gratitude thing that I want to talk about, is the support that we have gotten for this channel. It's unbelievable to me. I just created this channel as a way to connect with people during the pandemic, and it's grown to such a thing that it's no longer just mine. I really think of it as ours now. And I want to say thank you. So 2 shows ago, we had a donation from Superfan and I said, I want to give this back to the viewers. So last show we did ad free. So if you watch it live, you join the live show, you're going to see it without any commercial interruption. And then we had another generous donation from Don Carter, who's in the chat right now. Thank you, Don. Don's a big contributor also to the Facebook group. And so this show is brought to you also ad-free if you're watching it here live, thanks to the generous donation of Don Carter. I really appreciate it, guys. And if you want to keep it going, I'll keep it going ad-free for the live show.
I think that would be great.
So thank you again. And I want to say one more thing of gratitude before we get into the real meat of the show and we say hi to the folks that are already joined us in the chat. And that is that we're a finalist. We were nominated, as were many other great channels, for the 2024 Comic Book Community Award. And we made the cut. So
crazy.
We're a finalist among some other really amazing channels here on YouTube. I'm a fan of all these channels. They're great. And I'm humbled and honored to be counted among their number. And again, I think because it's not just my channel anymore, it's really grown beyond me. We are just thrilled to have been nominated and made the finalist list. I'm not going to actually ask people specifically to vote for us. I am going to, because I just view this as very collaborative, as you all know, and I'm a fan of some of these other channels. I don't actually want to make people feel like they have to pick between me and somebody else. I'm going to ask everybody, please, to vote, though, because all of these channels are deserving. None of us make any real money doing this. As a matter of fact, we're making, I mean, literally, I don't even know if I make a dime an hour in terms of the time that I invest in this channel. So please go vote, because we're all doing it for the love, right? So to make it easy for you, I put a link in the description.
Nice.
Just go to the video description and follow that link over to the page, click vote here. There's actually, it's a deep ballot. There's a lot of categories.
You gotta go through,
If you are somebody who doesn't watch a lot of other comic book content on YouTube and you just want to vote in this category, it's the 20-second block down. So you can just scroll down to that and vote in this category. Vote for everybody. And as a matter of fact, I do want to give one other plug in terms of a vote. And I will ask you to vote for this channel. And that is in the Hall of Fame, which I believe is the last block. Lords of the Long Box is there. And with TiVo's passing this year, that's a show that I really enjoyed, especially during the pandemic. And with TiVo passing away this year, I voted for Lords of the Long Box to just be into the Hall of Fame. I think he broke a lot of ground with that show. He entertained us when we needed entertainment, and it was a big loss to the community for him to pass away so young, especially. I mean, he was young. Like our age. He might have been younger than us, Larry. At any rate, so again, if you don't watch a lot of content, you can scroll to this here box, and just if you do that, it'll only take you about 20 seconds to vote. But please vote. All right. Let's do shout outs, shall we?
Okay.
Mike, my buddy Hugo Danner is here, of course. He always is. Actually, he was logged in an hour before we went live almost.
I saw that.
Schism Yee, hello. Professor Peter Alachi's here. The aforementioned Don Carter, the generous Don Carter, thank you. Shelby from Shelby's Comics is here. Ben Stewart is here. Sean Sealing. And I'm sure we have more than that, because we have 21 logged in right now. So give us a shout out if you're here. And Vulu is here. Thanks for the shout out. And I'm sure Mike will remind you all to give us a thumbs up too. Let us know how we're doing. So like I said, we have a lot to get through today. This is basically a normal episode, in that we're going to start off with our fair market value segment, which we normally do. Big book to talk about today. I'm super excited. You saw it on the thumbnail.
Yep. I love seeing that.
It really could have been on that slide where I have the big three, but then it would be the big four, the big five. It's right there with them. We've been already talking about it for weeks, so that'll be exciting. And then segment 2 is a Q&A segment. So what I did was we've had just a lot of engagement in the Facebook group, the Comic Book Conservation Facebook group. And I took a bunch of questions from there, and I thought we would use them as a jumping off point to discuss. I have my own answers for them. And so because I've already sort of seen them, I figure I'll give my answer and then have Phil and Captain Larry comment, join in, say how they do things differently. I think if you ask comic book conservators how they do something, you ask, 3 of us how we do it, you might get 5 different answers, right? So
exactly. The 3 of us collaborate, and yet we do things completely different from each other.
And I think we have plenty of people here in the chat who can also join in with their own answers. And then additionally, I think if there are questions, I'd be happy to field them. So I think, plenty of questions to keep us going. We can get all the way through that list or partially, whatever. I think we just let it free flow and we'll see how it goes. So without further ado, let's talk about this big boy. What do you guys think of this? That is a big book. This past week, Comic Connect had a 2.0 universal of this book. I think it hammered for about $60,000. Yeah, I didn't put it in here just because in terms of grade, it was so far away from this one. And in terms of, Final Hammer, it was actually not, it was quite a bit far away from this one as well. But this book doesn't change hands that often. For us to see 2 copies change hands in 1 year is not common, although one of them was restored, this one here. But I'm excited to talk about it. Let's jump right in. Let's see who else checked in with us. Bearded Comic Collector, hello. Glad to see you here live. Maurice Devereaux, someone who's been a longtime supporter of the channel. Aaron Conyers, welcome. Ben Stewart says, could you explain how to donate to the CBC show? So I believe you're just going to have an option in YouTube to say, I think it might be called a super chat. And you can just click right there, right in the chat or in the comments, and you can make a donation. I've done it before, but I don't have the process memorized. I mean, I've done it for other shows. I think that it just got unlocked after we achieved 4,000 subscribers. So that's why I'm not super savvy on it yet. But actually, Don Carter's here. Don can probably tell us exactly how he did it. All right, let's get started. So I'm going to mention PBA Galleries again. Those of you that have been watching know that I'm mining their DC Universe Collection Part 3 auction for all these great books. Again, I want to give a shout out to Ivan Briggs, who's the curator there and who put together this collection. And PBA Galleries, keep an eye on them. They put together, and Ivan puts together some great auctions. So this was yet another book that sold at that DC collection auction, Flash Comics #1, January 1940. So again, we're talking very early superhero golden age, years pre-war, that first period when everything was fresh and new and ideas were flowing and there was some incredible talent working in this field. First appearance and origin of the Flash. But that's not all. You also get Hawkman. Shira Sanders is there, but she is not yet Hawkgirl. The Whip, who didn't go on to infamy. Johnny Thunder, who kind of did, because Johnny Thunder, of course, became a member of the JSA. sort of fell out of favor, but throughout the whole golden age, they were published in Johnny Thunder books. And Johnny Thunder, of course, for those of you that were reading comics in the 80s, Roy Thomas brought him back in All-Star Squadron. So you got to see Johnny Thunder and his Thunderbolt there. So also featured in Stargirl, if you watch the more recent, series on TV. So median grade 5.0. It was actually split almost exactly between 5.0 and 4.5, which is a little bit high. 48 universal copies. Oh, look at this. Thank you, Ben. I guess we're going ad-free next week too. Super appreciate it, my man. Thank you.
Thank you.
Humbled by the love everyone is showing us. 48 universal, 41 restored shows you just how big this book is. When we see, similar numbers for restored and universal, that's for the real big books where, even in restored value, they have, or in restored condition, you have a lot of value. Looks like we lost Phil. Hopefully we'll get him back soon.
He'll be back.
So it could have been on this list, right? It just a few more copies in the census than Action 1. Just a little bit less important than these 3 books. Maybe you could make an argument it's as important as All-American 16 or maybe even more. But then it has quite a few more copies, which is why for me, All-American 16 is in this big 3 and Flash 1 is not quite in the big 3. Love to hear you guys' thoughts on this, though. Would you bump one of these for Flash 1? I guess there's no, it's not even close for Action or Tech 27, but would you bump All-American 16 for Flash 1 here?
Yes.
I would. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would.
Yeah.
For me, I like All-American 16 just because of the rarity. I like the cover a little bit more too, but I get the argument. Flash 1 has more copies than even Action 1.
Yeah. Yeah. I get where you're coming from too, though, Paul, because All-American is just so rare. But it's not necessarily just about rarity. You have to give, if you asked 100 people on the street between Flash and Green Lantern, I feel like you get more Flash people than Green Lantern, just out of hearing about it more.
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, cultural relevance is important, right?
Exactly.
Well, it was my number 4 book, so we're quibbling here. It's in this group for me of these other sub 50 in the census mega keys that have really important first appearances. For me, it's above Marvel Comics 1. I think it's just more important. I could see how, I think Marvel Comics 1 has traditionally sold for more, but I think you have better first appearances. You have a better first cover.
You're coming from a historical perspective, not just monetary too, which is really purist and understanding too.
Yeah. So
for me, I would actually lean towards Marvel Comics, but I'm a Marvel guy. So if I had a choice between those 2 books, I would probably take the Marvel Comics number 1.
I think when we were kids and Marvel was king because they were just dominating. Chris Claremont was putting out 5 books a month, and they were the 5 best things hitting the newsstand. And the X-Men were so big, and Marvel was really eating DC's lunch. This book passed all of the DC big keys, right? I mean, this book was neck and neck with Action 1 back then because people were just huge Marvel fans. And I think, there's been over time, Marvel and DC, they have their periods of greatness. And I do think that this book is definitely worthy of being in that group. And again, we're quibbling. We have them right there. And then this group here, we're going to be talking about one of these books soon.
I knew where you're going with that.
I'll catch that. Guess what Dr. Paul has, everybody?
Heck yeah.
I actually won this book in that same PBA auction.
Congratulations.
We're going to wrap
That's
up the
good.
PBA,
I love
PBA auction with that book.
I happen to notice there's quite a bit of specter behind your head there, Dr. Paul.
I mean, it might be something. Early
You're
not a
funds
fan
might
or
be a
anything.
thing that I'm interested in. Yeah, so these are the other ones that are super rare, but just the first appearances in them are just not as culturally relevant. Actually, this is not the first appearance of Sandman. It's actually his second appearance, but first full cover.
That's his first cover.
Yeah. I mean, he's got just like here, let's do this. Just like Hawkman has a little bubble here, and is that Hawkman's first cover? I mean, Flash 2 is his first kind of full cover. He's technically there, just like Rogue is technically on the cover of Avengers Annual 10. And just like Sandman is technically on the cover of New York World's Fair, but he's in a little circle bubble like that. So this is his first full cover, by far the more desirable of the two books.
Such a badass cover.
Oh, I love it.
All of these are too.
Yeah.
They're so good.
And I mean, I wish Dr. Fate was on More Fun 55, but it's still a great Bernard Bailey, Spectre cover. So anyway, these are the next tier for me. And then these are the next tier after that, because although these are more culturally important, they jump up in terms of CGC census count. I mean, these books are more like 150 universal plus some restored copies. So these are just not in the same rare air. Still obviously rare books, but
very desirable books.
Oh, all of them. Yeah. We might be doing a segment about one of these books coming up.
Yeah, I think we might.
So it's a rare book. It does not change hands very often. Universal in the last 5 years, no copies in this range from 5.5 to 7. Last 6.0 Universal sold 2018 for $120,000. But that was a long time ago. Bitcoin is a lot higher now than it was in 2018. There has been one relevant Universal sale in the last few years. In January of 2023, this 5.0 sold for $192,000.
That's a lot of money.
5.0, by the way, guys, is the median grade. So this is an average copy. With respect to
throw the taxes on there.
Yeah. So because this is the only relevant sale, it's not even in the last year, but let's call it the last 18 months. It's maybe even just outside of that, but I think it's the last relevant sale. I'm using this one to benchmark what a 6.0 Universal is worth. I'm saying between 220 and 240 if it were to come to auction today. And just to be conservative in my calculations in the end, I used $220,000. But I think a 6.0 Universal coming to auction today, I think has a chance of bringing $250,000 for the seller. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think I'd go with that. Yeah.
Yep. Also, because while that a 5 might be the median grade, again, it's like how often are copies coming up and what grade are they?
I just showed you that. Yeah, they're they're not available in these grades. I mean, a 2.0 Universal sold this past week. And there are some lower grade ones that, change hands from time to time, but in this mid, and high grade, if you have one, you're not going to give it up because you're probably never going to see another, right? And most of the whales that own these, they're not concerned about what they could get for it or how much it's appreciated.
Yeah.
So again, I'm saying 220 for a 6.0 Universal, but that's my estimate. And again, I recognize it could be quite a bit more. Because we have almost as many restored copies in the census as Universal, we had a few sales here that are relevant, and I want to highlight a few. These range from 33.6 in 2024, and we're going to highlight that one, for a 5.0 to $30,000 for a 7.0 restored back in 2018. The rest of them are old enough as to not really be relevant here.
Yeah, we can't count those.
So let's talk about this 5.0 restored. It presents really well. It does have some problems we're about to get into. And I think, you already saw the hammer price, but I'll show it to you again after we talk about the book. So again, January 1940, 5.0, off-white, which is nice. Apparent EP. Phil, you want to tell the viewers what EP
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that.
So, as we've discussed on the channel, the current rubric that, we've talked about is A, B, C, and then 1 through 5. So seeing apparent EP is, what is that? Well, that's the rubric before the current modern version. And what apparent EP stood for is apparent expert professional restoration.
Extensive professional.
Excuse me.
Extensive.
Yes. So it's the most amount that they would quantify done professionally, but you can see why they changed it, because it's not very clear. It's not as clear as a lettered, numbered rubric that really gives you a more concise description of the restoration.
So they used to have slight, moderate, and extensive, if I recall correctly. They had 3 categories, and now they've expanded it to 5.
Yep.
I may be wrong about slight, but it was definitely moderate and extensive. And then they had professional and amateur.
And one other thing too,
yeah,
that I was just going to say is, when you see apparent used now in nomenclature, it's almost always synonymous with trimming. Almost always. So it's like the apparent grade is this because of this obvious defect, which they're notating the trimming.
Yeah. But in this rubric, again, it looks to be this grade because of the restoration. So it just basically went along with restoration.
Yep.
So were you trying to say something, Larry?
No, Phil just covered it, because I was going to say the apparent, when you see that, I've never seen the EP before, but that was new. But the apparent is always, I was going to say, is I see that with trimming, just exactly what Phil was saying.
They also use it for qualified books.
Well, it's like if you were
green label says apparent as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, this was graded almost 20 years ago. If you were to submit it today, what would be the nomenclature for it? We wouldn't see apparent EP at all.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also that's a good point of why you don't see too many of these, is because the overall time period in which they were using this rubric really was a smaller percentage versus the overall timeline that CGC has been grading. So you do see more, and more books were just being submitted, and also a lot of books that you would see that needed restoration that were big key books are probably still in Wales collection. So you're just not seeing those books is another reason why.
So restoration includes color touch, pieces added, tear seals, reinforced, again, extensive. So you can assume a lot of this book has had some work. This book has had a lot of work, is a way to put that. But it was done professionally. So, maybe like your favorite movie star actress as she ages, you can say she's had a lot of work done and she still looks pretty good. This book presents really quite well, I think.
It looks beautiful.
Yeah.
We'd have to go back 20 years to see who all was doing this kind of work.
Yeah. I do wish we had the
yeah.
data on who did these restorations. I wish there was a database for everyone that is in the census. I know that they want the anonymity for the graders. They don't want the graders to go, oh, this is a book from Phil, so I know I need to grade it high because he's a pro or whatever, right? He's got a great reputation. But, they could keep the information separate from the graders, and then they could apply it after the graders are done.
Yeah, just provenance. That could be a thing.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, yeah.
I did also, forgive me because I'm using a smaller screen. I forgot, because again, you don't see this period of books being restored as often as you used to. You can see extensive and then the P above the letter. Yeah, so I think I misspoke initially when I said extensive, but it is more obvious when you look at the grade there, extensive, and then it'll either be a P or an A for amateur. Yeah.
Yep.
I forgot.
So the greater specific notes say back cover wear, bottom spine wear, front cover large multiple crease, front cover wear, top spine wear, whole book multiple bend. So one wonders if a press wouldn't improve this grade.
Sure would probably. This is probably a 6.5 from what I'm looking at, even though it's restored. I mean, heck, it could be. I don't see any obvious. I can see actually a crease from like the center right to the like working its way down on the front cover, but it's very light. But even with that, I could see this hitting.
It presents beautifully. I'm sure at arm's length, this book is something to behold, you know?
Well, the next question that would pop up, since this is a 20-year-old restoration, would you take a crack at it there?
Well, let's save that question for the end when we talk about fair market value.
Okay.
So this book, 5.0, sold for $33,600 June of 2024. That includes the buyer's premium. So remember, our book of interest is a 6.0 that just came to auction this week, or a couple weeks ago now. But this one was only just a few months ago, a 5.0, brought $33,600. So for reference, here's our book, 6.0. You know, looking at them, they present pretty well. I think you make an argument even that the 5 maybe presents, but it doesn't have that dust shadow on the right edge, which I know, Phil, you don't like.
I hate that.
I can live with it. Sometimes it depends. That's actually not too bad. That looks more like a shadow against the case than an outright shadow. I mean, I'm saying that it is a shadow in the book, but it's not as dark as it could be sometimes.
Well, let's go through the grader's notes here. So off-white to white pages, graded just June of this year. So this is a fresh slab. This is going to have the new nomenclature, B3. So Phil, why don't you tell the folks at home what B3 means?
All right. B is somewhere between professional and amateur, but that also could mean that some of the work here is A level, but the worst level work is B, so it gets the whole umbrella.
Any one item, right? If you did 20 things and one of them was B level, it doesn't even necessarily mean the work. It actually could be even some of the materials they deem B level.
Exactly. And sometimes looking at the grader's notes, as Paul's going to go through, sometimes it's a little more descriptive and you can actually make out, this specific thing is why it got to be, but some of the other stuff might be A or C, A level. So
A level, yeah. So overall B3, 3 is the amount. So on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the least amount of restoration, 5 the greatest. This is kind of right in the middle. Restoration includes color touch, pieces added, reinforced, first wrap trimmed, and they note that it's from the DC Universe collection. First wrap trimmed. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I'm trying.
Is that a big turnoff, or does it not bother you because it's just the first wrap?
Well, it makes me wonder. What came to mind was it was a married page that didn't fit right, so they trimmed it to make it look right, but didn't get away with it.
But we don't see here that it's married, so it does.
No, that's what's throwing me off.
It makes me wonder too.
Why would it even been done to begin with?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, you know what I would think? I would think that before this book looked the way that it did and had the restoration done, probably had a gnarly spine roll. That first wrap was maybe loosened up a little bit from the staples, but was still attached, or maybe not even. Maybe it was just, and someone kind of just lazily said, "All right," and now it looks better, and they just kind of, before even the restoration was done, it's possible. So that was already done prior to the restoration being done.
Yeah.
So I really don't like trimmed covers, but I don't think trimmed first wrap bothers me much. What do you guys?
I agree.
Do you guys?
Yeah, no.
Would that be a big turnoff?
I would say the existence of the rest of the restoration here makes me view this as I would just standard restoration that's just included with it. So I don't view it negatively like you. There's no, it's this, because I wouldn't get it. If I was looking for a restored copy, I think this would still be a very Very nice.
Yeah, I would be very attracted to this book.
Yep.
So top and bottom edge of first wrap trim. Now we're into the actual grader's notes. Color touch on cover, creasing to cover, pieces added spine B3.
B3.
And there's exactly what you mentioned, Phil. They're telling us that the pieces added to the spine, either the work or the material, were not quite to the standard they consider professional. Spine reinforced, spine stress lines to cover. I think it's a beautiful book.
I have one thing to say too that just came to mind, and that is that it's very possible that this book, if it was submitted a couple of years ago, before the conservation stance on piece fills was changed, this book probably would have gotten an A level. But because the piece fill here was done traditionally,
Yep.
and the size and not leaf casted, they gave it the B and not the A. That's
Really, even in restored.
I was wondering about that.
I could be wrong about that, but I say that
No, I think you're right.
because I had books during that period that were getting pegged for B and C level, even when they should have been conserved, but then they changed the stance. So I was like, clearly they were viewing the work kind of indiscriminately. There wasn't consistency with that, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, what do you guys think it hammered at? Before you guess, here's your reference. Just a few months earlier, 33.6 for a 5.0.
Larry, what do you think?
That has more extensive restoration.
I think I'm going to go on the low side. I think it hammered probably about the mid 40s.
You got a guess, Phil?
I'm going to go, not to play the price is right, but I'm going to go 37.5.
I don't have my
Price is Right.
I don't have my soundboard, so somebody give me a drum roll.
Ah.
No way.
Somebody
Folks.
had inside information.
Folks, we
Come
did not
on,
review
Phil.
this beforehand. Phil just nailed it.
Phil.
I swear to God.
No, he didn't.
Uncanny.
He's too busy to read my show notes.
Are you like this is that's uncanny. I'm not trying to say that I, kind of know myself.
37.5. I think, Ivan had the estimate at 50 to 80 grand. And relative to Universal, which we estimated at 220 grand, 50 to 80 is very reasonable.
It really is, but it's just based on that prior one year. So I was basing it off of that. That's
37.5 this book hammered for. I was not in the market for this book. I have all-star priorities. If I was going to spend this kind of money, it would be on an all-star book.
Oh.
But I think this is a very reasonable price to pay for this book. I think the opinions on restored books, especially higher grade restored books, have basically never been lower. And my opinion is these things tend to go like a pendulum, right? They tend to swing over time. It used to be restored books were held in quite high regard. At the moment, they're really at the nadir of how people view them. At some point in the future, these books will start appreciating again.
Oh yeah.
If for no other reason than they're just the desire for these books, the people that want these books, that population continues to grow, but the number of books does not continue to grow. So there's going to just have to be people that accept restored copies. So I think this was well bought, and we lost.
I do too. I think. See, I look at these things, especially of course, everybody knows I hate the purple label. I would gladly trade that for a conserved label, and I'd look hard at it at what can be done. It depends on the extensiveness of the color touch. Everybody knows color touch is an automatic, purple label.
Sure.
So if you could remove the color touch, and that would actually be a Phil question, what do you think? I think this particular book, that one trimmed first wrap. Depends on how
Mhm.
bad it was. Could you add the paper? Yeah, you could leaf cast more material onto it and then redo it. But
Sure.
um, and a book of this caliber, especially this iconic book, would it be worth taking a crack at it? And I would say yes.
It might financially be. I mean, by the way,
Would I
guys,
do it myself? I'm not sure.
by the way, guys,
I'd send it to Phil.
yeah,
Well,
I didn't
shucks.
put it in this deck, but the 2.0 Universal that just sold, if I'm not mistaken, this past week, I think it hammered for 57 grand. So imagine if you just took this thing and you just with a butter knife, you hacked out all the restoration.
Yeah, you're still going to make money.
You'd still have a 2.0.
Yeah.
Would it not sell for 50 or 60 grand?
Yeah.
Well, and in there lies the every book is its own book. So really,
Sure.
it all depends on where the color touch is and what the
Mhm.
book's going to look like after. And it would be one of the things where maybe it makes sense, but
I should have
maybe it
put that.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Sorry, maybe it makes sense, but the eye appeal is going to be so drastic
Oh,
that even any
I
potential buyer is going
I
to be
should
like,
have put it in here. The 2.0 that just sold, the whole bottom is missing. It's the eye appeal is awful.
oh, so that kind of helps explain the price a little bit too. Then,
Yeah.
yeah. Huh.
I do think.
I can see what you're saying then. So even if you do hack this, then that kind of it's at
Yeah.
least yeah. No, I
I
mean you
mean,
kind of make a
even
good
if it
point.
went
From a
down to a
potential level.
4 or 4 or a 3 by hacking the color touch off.
You then can make the argument that depending on how the book lies, it makes more sense just to leaf cast it so that way there's no one's trying to deceive what it looks like. You can see
Yep.
what was original, and then that first page is casted, and then the book gets into a conserved holder based on the color loss on the cover, which the book could probably get a very modest, let's say hypothetically a 3 or 3.5. And then depending on where the color touch is, maybe it's a best case scenario where it's actually a little bit higher. But even
Yeah.
being conservative there, that's a desirable, I think would be a desirable copy.
Yeah. Really interesting book to discuss.
Yeah. I cannot see the color touch in these photos.
No.
Nothing that stands out glaringly.
It's probably, in my experience with something like this, it's going to be like the top left, and that yellow's blended in so well that you don't see it here, but upon closer inspection, that's just what I would first look at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, was it well bought? It hammered
I
for
would say so, yes.
17% of what I estimated conservatively the universal value to be. I think it was very well bought. But
I think somebody got a deal on
we
that.
talked about this though. The second bullet point, there is price compression in high grade restored Golden Age comics. There's just only so much appetite for restored books. And once people get to the point where they're dropping 5 figures or deep 5 figures, they're just not interested in, there just aren't that many interested buyers in restored copies. And they will go to, typically, if you're going to drop 50 grand on this book, the people that are dropping 50 grand on this book would rather have a 1.5 universal than have a 6.0 restored.
Yep.
And again, I mentioned this when you dropped out, Phil, but restored books have never been in lower regard. I mean, I think that pendulum has to swing back, but who knows? I don't, I'm not clairvoyant like you.
It might be a buyer's market.
I don't have a crystal ball. I think they have to come back. I think they will come back just because the book is so rare and the number of people that want it continues to grow. That there's going to have to be some people in the marketplace that say, you know what? It's still mostly original and it looks way better than that dog-eaten 2.0. And I'm happy with it. I'm happy with the way it presents. I don't mind the purple label.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
or maybe you just don't have a choice because all the other people that have copies just don't want to sell them, and the cost is just going to continue to go up.
Right?
Yeah.
What else are you going to do? That's your choice is don't own it or own it restored.
Yep.
Or own it in a 0.5 or it literally a 0.5 would sell for around the same number as this. 0.5 to 1.0 would sell for what this book sold for. Those are rough looking books. So anyway, what do you guys think of that segment?
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
I would love to have that book.
And there's still some big books left in that auction to talk about. I mean, what an auction. Larry, you pointed out a great conserved book that hammered this past week, which I'm looking forward to talking to you about. Okay. But I want to get through all these PBA ones first, just because
let's do
just such a fertile ground to find books to talk about from.
Yeah, forgive me. My audio and video keeps freezing like every 20 minutes, so I have to like close the browser and open it back up. And I was thinking of trying to do it for my phone, but I might just have to do that a couple more times.
It's actually you're just gone for like 20 seconds.
Oh, okay.
And up until then, we hear you fine.
Yeah, so perfect.
It's not too bad.
Okay. We don't talk about you, so
I'll rewatch the video.
You'll know. All right. Well. Who else joined us? Pluck My Last Nerve is here. Shelby says someone got a great deal. I think they did.
Yeah,
I agree with Shelby.
You really don't see the book that often, too. You really don't.
Ben Stewart said he just got an advertisement. I have to admit, I'm not super YouTube savvy, but I definitely turned monetization off for this episode, Ben. So I will look into that, but I'm not sure how that happened. Pluck My Last Nerve says, too Rick for my blood. We know what you meant.
We do.
All right. Well, let's jump into our second segment then. This is our Q&A segment. I plucked some questions from some noobs and some folks that have been around our comic book conservation community Facebook group. I reached out to them and said, hey, I'm planning on using your questions. I'm going to credit you. Nice. And I figure we'll just use these as a guide for conversation. Like I said, Phil and Larry haven't seen them. So I will read it, and then I will, because I've had a chance to kind of mentally digest it, I will tell you what I think. And then I'll look for Phil and Larry to either disagree with me or concur. And of course, anybody who's in the chat's welcome to let us know what they think. And also feel free to put your questions in the chat as well. We're just going to do free flow here for the next, say, 45 minutes or so, depending on how it goes. And we'll just answer as many questions as we can. So let's get started. So first group of questions comes from Jason Vonderau, I assume is how we say it. He is adrift here on YouTube, and I don't mean he's just like wandering YouTube. I mean, that's his screen name at YouTube. Is it always best to use wheat paste on covers and methyl cellulose for inner pages? Should you use wheat paste on staple holes to better reinforce the integrity of the seal? So I have some sort of like top level thoughts. First, wheat paste and methyl cellulose are both adhesives. They are both considered archival. That said, methyl cellulose is considered to be just slightly more inert than wheat paste. For example, if they're both in a damp environment, wheat paste is more likely to have a mold infestation or something like that. Methyl cellulose, just a tiny bit more inert than wheat paste. And my approach to using them is I will use, before I get into that, methyl cellulose also easier to mix up, easier to maintain. So wheat paste is kind of a pain to make. Yep. And it does not have a long shelf life. So you have to remake it. Yep. And it also doesn't,
what you need.
It doesn't work quite as well, meaning by work, I mean, when you're brushing it in, the wheat paste can be a little bit lumpy. It's not quite as smooth flowing as methyl cellulose. Methyl cellulose has just a little bit of slip to it. Mm-hmm. So it's easier to work into paper. All of that said, then you would say, well, why would I ever use wheat paste? Wheat paste is a stronger adhesive than methyl cellulose. So here's my rule of thumb. I use methyl cellulose everywhere, unless it's not strong enough as an adhesive, then I use wheat paste. That's how I view it. In terms of a rule of thumb, that means If I'm on the spine of a cover, I'm probably using wheat paste because I really need a strong bond there when I'm going to refold that spine. If I'm anywhere else, I'm probably using methyl cellulose, including the rest of the cover other than the spine. So that's my take. What do you guys think?
I agree with you 100%. I've sat and used methylcellulose on a cover, mainly because it was handy, and I was being too lazy to actually go make up a small amount.
It keeps really
of wheat
well. You
paste.
made it up,
Yeah,
and
it's right there
yeah.
on the desk, and I regretted it. Actually, as soon as I pressed the spine, it popped the staples right through like it didn't even exist. So my answer to that is I always use wheat paste on the cover, especially on the staple holes.
Yep.
For me, I guess I'm kind of toeing the line a little bit, because how about this for an answer? Depending on what I'm doing, if I'm using wheat paste, I'm always also using methylcellulose. Otherwise, if I'm using just methylcellulose on its own for its own purpose, then it's used for its own purpose. But whenever I use wheat paste, I always will use methylcellulose, because I've found that it acts as an additional protective layer kind of over the wheat paste tear that you're sealing. And that's just
So
the way that I was
you're
taught.
using them both together on the same tear.
In tandem, correct. That's just how I was taught, and it's possible. I mean, this is very much legacy techniques. This is what the godfather of comic restoration taught his students: was you seal a tear with wheat paste, and then you use methylcellulose to help as an extra adhesive on the excess fibers, and just also as an extra protective layer
Just
over
another
it.
layer. Yeah.
And to that point, Dr. Paul said methylcellulose is more inert, right? I think that's the word that you used.
Yep.
And that's why I found in my own experience, handling a lot of books over the years, methylcellulose is like, I don't want to say it's like a magic wonder tool, but really I've found that it has extreme qualities, just in terms of even adding a little bit of extra reinforcement at a staple that's not even necessarily torn, but it's weak. And then you just put a little bit over it, and like that strengthens it. So I love methylcellulose. When I use wheat paste traditionally, I also use a little bit of methylcellulose over that.
That's great.
Okay. Interesting technique. Yeah.
I want to highlight this comment. Don Carter says, again, Don Carter brought you this episode ad-free. I screen my wheat paste. This is a pro move. This is next level stuff right here. This is what conservators do to get really smooth, non-lumpy wheat paste. It takes more time. You waste a certain amount of material that gets caught in your screen. But basically, the idea here is you mix up your wheat paste. It can be lumpy. And then you push it through a metal screen, like a really fine mesh, like on a colander. And then you scrape off the wheat paste that comes through. That's pro level. That's how it should be done. Most of us, especially, us hobbyists, are probably not doing that.
Larry,
I tend to just kind of mash the lumps down with my brush and kind of spread them around. But
I mean, it's no secret. If anyone wants a technique to make wheat paste, I'll share mine. And it's funny because when I have people over my apartment and they see my microwave in my kitchen, and I tell them I don't use that for food. That's for my wheat paste.
That's exactly. I make my wheat paste in the microwave as well.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Yeah, and it's I have a little ceramic kind of jar that I use that's open at the top, and I have a spoon. So as I'm putting it in every 10 seconds with the water, I'm just constantly kind of mashing it down and stirring with the spoon, put it back in 10 seconds until I get the right consistency. And
I have a 50 milliliter beaker that I use for my wheat paste, and I do 10-second pulses in the microwave. Between pulses, I get the brush, I stir it up. Yep.
For other expert level people like Don, there's also a video on Talus website. It's actually on YouTube, but you can find a link from Talus on how to make wheat paste.
Yep.
Peter says, anyone use nori? It's a starch adhesive. I do not use nori.
I
But
have a
obviously
jar
I'm
of it.
aware of it.
I've never opened it. I do own a jar. Alan Chow uses nori paste. He's not here, but he is in
Alan does.
our group, and I
Yep.
would consider him an expert on the nori paste. I was
Yeah.
just looking at Vulu asked about the shelf life of these pastes, and I think that's an excellent question. Methylcellulose, I've used the same jar for ages. Now on the wheat paste, definite shelf life. I keep mine in the refrigerator, and after about a week, it's in the bin, because now you start looking at really getting mold into your wheat paste, and that's exactly what you don't want.
Yeah, methylcellulose months at room temperature.
I've had mine on a level where I'm like, it still smells fine, but I know when I made this, and it was a lot.
I'm just gonna make more. Yeah.
So yeah.
And wheat paste, more like days.
One day,
maybe a week or two if you
I think about it like fresh bread. It's gonna go stale, and then it's gonna get moldy. It's just, what is your time frame?
Or actually, both of you. Actually, I'm curious, because we talked about that. But when you're making the quantity of wheat paste, how much are you making? There, you said I think you mentioned some quantity.
Oh, I use a 50 milliliter beaker, and for those at home, it's about that big in diameter and about that tall. And I mix it on the exact ratio as they recommend, and because I don't use a lot. When I do it, it's very, very small amounts. So, and I look at it in the sense that I am going to wash it down the drain after I'm done.
Yeah.
Paul, how much do you make?
I make a tiny amount. The amount I make would get caught in the metal screen that Don uses, and just you wouldn't have any left. That's how small my. So the ratio that they list on the side of the Lineco jar, I want to say it's like 5-to-1 with water, maybe.
That's exactly what it is.
And what I do is I actually just I have these tiny measuring spoons. I use the one that says a dash, which is like a 32nd of a teaspoon or whatever the heck it is, right? So I take a dash of the powder, and then I take 5 dashes of water, and I put them in this little glass. It's a tiny little glass bowl that I have, and I make it in there. If those of you that have watched my videos have seen it. And
Paul, I love that, Paul, because
I make just that tiny amount.
I'm
not going to, and in fact, I use less than 10% of that, and the rest of it, does get washed down the drain. So.
I'm doing you mentioned it's the 5-to-1. So when I use my spoon, I'm measuring never more than, not even a half. Like it's always like 2/5 of a spoonful of the powder and then water. So I'm making such a small amount that it's almost, sometimes I have to make like a little bit more than that, because it actually doesn't really mix.
Yeah, you have
so
to.
It's like
you have to. You have to make, at least on our level, because we're just not consuming enough. You have to make.
I'm also guilty of eyeballing it. That looks about right. Mix it up, microwave it, and throw a little bit more water in it.
That's fine, right? Yeah, it's not real chemistry. You're just trying to make an adhesive. Couple comments here. Jason made it. Thanks for joining us. And he says, thanks for reviewing his questions. Don Carter says he has used nori paste. It takes too long to dry. I've heard that from others.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I've heard that.
The professor says he likes nori. So
I don't have the patience for waiting for something to dry. Everybody knows that. So I need it dry right now.
All right, let's move on. Question 2, how many layers of Tengujo are too many when doing repairs, and how do you determine how many to use on particular repairs? Okay. Again, I will answer. I never use more than one. I believe that Tengujo, the purpose of it is to basically mend a tear. And if you have a tear and you are adjoining 2 pieces and you are putting something over them and then an adhesive over that, I never use more than one. I do not use Tengujo to bridge gaps. I don't use it to do piece fill. I don't use it underneath leaf casting or inside a layer of casted paper. I don't use it that way. So I never use more than one. I'm not sure that I would go on a limb and say if you're using more than one, you're doing it wrong. But I will say this. My practice is mostly advised or informed by my study of the paper conservation literature. And when I look at the literature on paper conservation, conservators, librarians, and museum curators, I have never seen anybody use more than one layer of Tengujo paper, Japanese paper of any sort. So that is why I do it the way I do it. But again, I am, I know that, I'll say before you guys jump in, I know that Shelby answered all of these questions in the Facebook group, and Shelby mentioned sometimes using multiple layers. And I also know there's some other folks on YouTube that use multiple layers. So go ahead, guys.
Phil,
what are your thoughts?
All right. I agree with you for the most part. I use one layer because it is basically to mend tears. Now, where I would deviate from that is if you have all the material that's there on a staple hole repair, like it's the tape, the staple tore through, but the paper is there, and you need to mend that tear. I will make a little teeny line and lay a second layer over that.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is you've seen in some of my videos where I have a completely split cover, and I didn't leaf cast it together. This is before I started doing the leaf casting. I would take those two halves, and I would lay down 2 layers on to make that to join that spine, because it's a heavy wear area, and we've seen it come back, and we've got some good reviews on it. So that would be where I agree with you, but I do use a second layer to cover staple holes and to mend entire page or
I think
separation.
I think when you're using it that way, you're actually, you don't really need it when you're just doing a mend. You need it when you're trying to do a little bit of infill. It's not quite enough to justify maybe leaf casting, because there's some paper missing there, right?
Yeah, if you're going to leaf cast, you're going to have a gap, not a crack, because you got to have material for it to. The hydrogen bonding is so important in a leaf cast, and if you have just a crack where all the paper's there and all the pieces fit together, you're generally not going to leaf cast that because the bond won't be there. I don't believe.
So I'll go on record and say, using it there, and that's exactly where Shelby suggested to use it. I think that's smart. Again, I don't do that, but I'm definitely not saying it's wrong to do that. I'm actually saying that's smart.
I like hearing this because you guys both do it kind of differently than I do. So that's
all three of us. That's why we have this. That's why we have this group of 3 of us. We do everything differently.
So I was taught the way I was taught. Cyril really stressed heavily that the biggest amount of stress in the book is at the staples, which makes sense. And so I get why you would put 2 pieces if you were to join the spine, but for me, I've never done it that way. What I'll do is I'll take, let's say you have a piece, I like this as an example, right? So let's say this is a staple hole and a staple hole, right? I'll have a piece that takes up I'll have a piece that takes up just the whole area of the staple. Like, let's say, hold on a second, I'll fold this in half. So it's even clearer. Let's say you're really zoomed in. The staple hole is like here, here. I have a piece that just covers it, and then I put another piece that creates a circumference that totally covers it. So it's like a bigger pocket covering it.
Yeah.
And then what I'll do is I'll do that on the cover and then at the center fold.
Yep, those are the two places I do it.
I think I think the other folks that are doing I think the other folks that are doing 2 layers are doing exactly that, Phil. I don't see anybody putting 2 layers the same size. They're usually staggered in size.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Yeah. No, that's correct. And I agree, just the center wrap and the cover wrap, because you're making your sandwich for your staples.
I think it's like I understand, especially like if you're doing it on a booklet, Larry, like you said, where the spine is totally split. I can
Yeah,
understand on a like a Silver Age book that the paper's thinner to kind of add it. There's no harm in adding it, but
yeah,
in my mind, the wheat paste is so strong, especially with that little extra layer of methylcellulose I'm always putting. It's strong enough where like it's not necessary. It just
Yep.
it's like a third coat of paint. Like it's going to serve a purpose, but if you're
yeah.
working on a lot of books too, it just becomes kind of a
Yeah, I think I've had enough books where I was really happy with the repair, and then I folded the new spine in and had the staples pop. And once you've had that happen to you a
yep,
couple times,
yep.
you get
You
tired
put
of it.
another
And
piece. You put another
yeah, it's
piece.
just like let's weld another piece of steel on top.
Yeah.
The professor has a great point and a correction actually for me. Usually one layer of Tengujo, but some conservators flip the hanging tail of the Tengu tissue onto the other side for better support. I have seen that. That's correct.
Yeah, I have seen that as well.
But that's not really 2 layers. That's actually just mending the tear from both sides.
Yes,
So
I try to keep my tear seal confined to one side.
yeah,
Just hit the
Yeah,
other side with methylcellulose. You don't
yeah,
need
yeah,
a piece of Tengujo. You just hit it with a little methylcellulose.
exactly.
yeah. All right. I think that means we can move on. Slightly longer question. For pieces that are missing, is it better to simply reinforce the outline of rips or to attempt to do a complete fill? I ask because I've seen some conservator videos where they'll essentially recreate or fill in missing pieces with Tengujo, but others will cut those areas back out after reinforcing them because of the concern of getting a purple label. Again, I'll just throw my answer out there. I don't do piece fill with Tengujo. I think you can get away with a little bit of it, especially around staples, but any piece more than, say, like 1/8 of an inch dimensionally is just asking for a purple label. You're asking for a piece fill restored designation. And
Yep.
so I don't do it. So if I have something that has some missing material, I will reinforce and cut the Tengujo back out of the missing area, or I'll leaf cast it.
I do the same thing.
Yeah, and I did get Phil. You were the one who really pointed this,
Yeah.
like gave me the heads up that I really need to be mindful of this.
Vigilant on it. Yep. I mean, I say that because I remember right when that changed. I can't remember if it. I was about to send in a Detective 38, and you know, big book, and I was hesitating because I knew I was experiencing those issues, and then I got this solidified. I was like, I have to remove these binary piece fills. And I was like, or this is going to get hit with the purple label. And I think due to the technical defects, it wasn't really going to change the grade. I just wanted to do it
Yeah.
to be as efficient with the conservation. But I was like, all right now marks the change. So I wasn't able to add that tiny little binary, like about 1/8 of an inch, like you said. That's all it takes. It's less than you think.
I mean, practically everybody now is leaf casting. We went from one person in the industry to 2 people to a whole bunch of us now are leaf casting. So just leaf cast it.
Yep. If you're going to do the piece fill, just leaf cast it, like Paul said.
That's how I feel
Unless
too.
it's a book that you're working on and it's just not cost effective, maybe. You know, that's another element to it too, because leaf casting isn't free.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Unless you can do it and it works. But if you're just trying to do work on your own books and you don't want to jump into leaf casting, no, if you do the piece fill traditionally, you're going to get hit with a purple label.
Yeah. Do the reinforcement and then cut it back.
Yep.
And you can get away with it around the staples as long as it's not a big window. As long as it's just the small staple area, you get away with it. Leave it there.
Yeah.
All right. At what point in the conservation process is it important to cold press a page to prevent shrinking? I don't know that I have a great answer for this. I cold press primarily because I'm more concerned with cockling and shrinkage that might be associated with differential drying. That's why I cold press, not so much to prevent total shrinkage, but I'm interested in y'all's answers for this. Or maybe we could flip the question and just say, when do you cold press versus a hot press? Could also do that.
That's good. I cold press when I need my hot press for something else. No, I actually will move it. Yeah, I'll move it to the cold press and leave it there. If I don't have anything going on, because I run 4 hot presses. However, I only have 1 cold press, and so if it's something important, I'll just slide it over under pressure, just leave it in the cold press and come back to it in a day or 2 and check on it.
Yeah, I think of Larry as one of the pioneers of hot pressing wet pages. So
Yeah.
long before I had I just suffered too many cockled pages and too many rippled, too many pages that I wasn't happy with the outcomes. I literally gave up hot pressing any kind of damp pages. And Larry taught me how he does it, because he's the original I ain't got time for cold pressing guy. And I think his process obviously works. He's had tremendous results. So he taught us. We had Jim Wolgart 2 shows ago, and he obviously was one of the guys who worked out the hop method, the heat overlay press, which is in a manner also a wet hot press. They figured out how to do that by adding some buffering and by tuning the heat down a little bit, turning the heat down a little bit. And I think, Larry, in some ways you did the same, but I think your method is simpler, and obviously it's being done for different reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do mine
faster.
for speed.
Yeah.
I need even with the 4 presses running, I need to be able to crank out a book in a day, maybe 2 days.
Yeah.
And that's all the wraps.
But the point here is, I don't think we're using cold press to prevent shrimping, unless, Phil, you want to comment here on that specific aspect. We're using cold press more to get a universal flat page, because I think we do get a flatter page when you take the time to cold press something. Even, Larry, when you do your hot press of a damp page, you will get some waviness to the paper that you're going to come back later after humidity, and you're going to flatten with another press.
I'll rehumidify it and flatten it with another press. Right. And the shrinkage control, which was the primary concern with this question, because nobody wants the shrinkage or differential sizes. I found, using my method, I am getting very little change, if any, in my dimensions of a wrap.
Right. You and I both have measured our interior pages and covers, and we're getting virtually no dimension changes.
Half a millimeter. Yeah.
Anything?
I have nothing to add, really. I mean,
okay.
All, yeah.
Well, I have something to add. This is incredible, guys. Cap One Superman, who was the original super fan here, who donated to the show to make the episode 2 weeks ago ad free, has also just made another generous donation. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Cap One Superman says, I've had great results with saving severely stained books with aqueous baths, but I've experienced cover shrinkage with Bronze Era comics. Is there anything that can be done to prevent this issue? So we just touched on this a little bit, but let's just take a moment to discuss this topic. So here's my perspective on it. I'm not sure why I don't get a lot of shrinkage. I don't know what it is specifically in my process that is preventing it, but I've measured it and I'm not getting any appreciable shrinkage in my Golden and Silver Age books. I have hypothesized that it's because I'm doing my drying under quite a bit of pressure. I've seen other conservators who just basically put a pretty light weight on top of their pages when they're drying them. As you see when you watch my videos, I'm using a slab of granite, and I keep it under that granite the whole time. I also keep it very flat. So one of the things you'll notice, if you take Hollytex or Ramée and you wet it, you put a comic page on it, you wet the page, you put then another sheet of Ramée, you wet that. One of the things that'll happen is the Ramée, the Hollytex, it's dimensionally stable, wet or dry, it's the same size. The comic book page expands when it's wet. It soaks up that water and expands. You'll actually see what'll happen is it'll develop a crown in the middle of a wrap because it's expanding and it's kind of stuck down. It's got to go somewhere. So what it'll do is it'll actually develop a crown.
Yeah.
I take pains to make sure it's wet enough that I can work that paper, and I'll use my squeegee and I'll flatten that crown out, and I'll have the sheet basically be stretched a bit, and I'll have it sandwiched obviously in Hollytex. Then I'll put my blotter layers, which I typically just use paper towels. Most of us do because blotting paper is quite expensive.
Yep.
And then I put the weight on it. So my page is basically stretched and then weighted. So does it shrink a little bit? Yes, but it just shrinks back to its normal dimensions.
Yeah.
Because there's pressure on
This
it.
is why I don't have actual shrinkage, right? So it starts like this. I wet it. It goes like this. I dry it. It goes back to here where it started. Now, if you had the page like this, you wet it, it crowned up, it cockled, it did other things. You don't have it billiard table flat. Then you put some weight on it. It's already like this, and now it shrinks. Now it's like this instead of being just expanding and shrinking back to where it was. This is what I think. I have measured it very carefully. I know I'm not getting shrinkage. However, I don't know exactly why. That's just my hypothesis of why it's working as well for me as it is. Larry, you use a similar method to me, and you also don't have any shrinkage.
Yeah, mine, if I take a completely wet page, it's between 2 layers of Hollytex. And when I take it to the heat press, I'll lay down 4 layers of paper towels, my sandwich, the Hollytex sandwich, then 1 layer of paper towels on top. And as you know, heat presses, the heat is on the top, it works down through the book. So water wants to get away from the heat in this case. So all that moisture, rather than going too evenly into the 2 sandwiches of paper towels, it all goes into the bottom set of 4 paper towels. 10 minutes, I take out that set of paper towels, swap them out with another set of dry paper towels completely, hit it again, and by that time, now it's completely dry just in 20 minutes of this process. Now, it does have all the paper towel, marks in it, and I wouldn't call it cockling, but more impressions.
A little bit of waviness, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit of waviness, but it looks like I pressed a brawny paper towel right into the wrap. I can almost read brawny. So from that point, I'll take those wraps, and those will go get rehumidified prior to reassembly. And then I press them in between 2 metal plates. And that also, because when you rehumidify it, again, it's going to soak up a little bit of moisture, but it's not sopping wet. So that goes between the 2 metal plates. I heat those. I'll run those 10 more minutes. And now I have a just glass smooth, I would say glass smooth, but I have a smooth wrap with no paper towel marks. And dimensionally, it's the same because I do all of the wraps together the same way. So they're dimensionally the same way they came out of the book. And for people who are doing this, our technique, you got to do all the wraps, people, not just one. Otherwise, you will have something that could very well stand out. And that's how I do mine.
Yeah. Larry's, I think absolutely that's best practice. I have done only a few wraps of a book before, but when I did it, I was very careful to compare them to the other wraps. And had I had any visible difference whatsoever, I would have done the rest of the wraps. You can sometimes get away with it, but best practice, absolutely, just do all of them.
Do them all.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you have any color change, tint, anything between two wraps, it's shooting up a red flag.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I want to talk about this comment a little bit. Ben says, I've heard 30 pounds is good for pressure. More is not necessary. I concur, but have limited experience and haven't weighed my marble cutting board. So weight is not pressure. And I don't want to lecture you, Ben, but I do want to say, like, pressure is a force divided by a surface area. So firstly, you have to know the surface area to know the pressure. So the same amount of weight, well, for example, an elephant's foot applies less pressure than a 100-pound girl wearing some stiletto heels at the bottom of the stiletto, right? I think we all kind of conceptually get that. Yep. Like, you'd rather have a car run over your foot than like a stiletto heel driven into your foot, even by just a small person's body mass. That's pressure. So I'm not sure about the 30 pounds. This may come from Rick Morgan. I know Rick Morgan, he sells some weights, and he also sells some thicker plexi that's, I believe he's maybe done some science, maybe done some math, and said, this is an appropriate pressure because I know the mass and I know the surface area of a comic book. That said, he's mostly doing cleaning and pressing. We're talking about conservation work where we need to drive the water out. Mm-hmm. And so I think generally we have different end goals. So I am not convinced 30 pounds is enough pressure for all of our conservation goals. For example, I don't think 30 pounds is enough to get optimum results for leaf casting. I think if you want optimum results for leaf casting, you need a lot more pressure than that. Yep. So, and again, 30 pounds is not an actual pressure. You would take the 30 pounds, you divide it by the surface area. But we're, I understand that lay people speak, they say 30 pounds is pressure. So I'm not trying to nitpick, but I am trying to be very exacting in the words that I use because I want to be helpful.
I think when people see, a glass plate being laid down on top of a comic book, and somebody takes a barbell, that they were done working out with, and sets it on top of it, good to go. Not necessarily.
Yeah. So, for some applications, that's plenty. And for others, it's not enough. So it depends on what you're trying to do with the book, what your goals are. I think generally, if you're trying to drive water out of a book and you're using pressure to do it, generally more pressure is better. If you look at the presses that are made for actually making paper from pulp, tons of force are used to do that, and that's what makes the strongest paper. So let's go back to this view here. This is the one I want, I think. Yeah. All right. I think we covered that. What rips should be mended? What rips, if any, can be ignored? Any rips on the cover should be mended. Most of your grade with CGC, 80% of your grade is wrapped up in the cover. So if you are on a budget, if you are on a time crunch, rips in the interior pages actually are not going to cost you very much with respect to your numeric or technical grade. You can skip them. That said, the only rips for me in terms of, sort of doing right by the book and conservation, I mend all rips with one exception, and those are the rips that you sometimes get at the bottom of the page from the little grabbers that move the sheets through the printing press.
They call those binding rips.
Is that right?
When they're pulling, or
bindery tears.
Thank you.
Bindery Is that tears. True?
Yep.
Yeah, because it's where they.
I thought the bindery tear was right at the spine. It's where the page is folded. I'm not talking about that.
That's a cover bindery tear. It's still part of how the machine. It's basically.
I thought it's more like a. I thought that was a different term, but at any rate, if you've seen it, especially in Golden Age books, you'll see this. But it's in, I guess, not so much in modern books, but Silver Age, Bronze Age, and back, you'll see this. You'll see actually little flags sometime of paper. There's literally little teeth that grabbed and pulled the sheet, and they make a little indentation. And sometimes they'll curl back the paper, or they'll even make a little rip in the paper. Yeah. I don't mend those. I leave them in there. They're part of the manufacturing process.
Yeah. Yeah.
But everything else, I seal up. Any consenting ideas on this?
I look at it from a structural standpoint. If I see a tear that is going to increase in size, I will, stop it and seal that tear.
Mhm.
If I see something that is going, like a corner is about ready to come off or something like that, of course I'll seal that. But other than that, I don't spend a horrible amount of time fixing tears that are, say, an eighth of an inch. That's just that.
I'll do them
you
in the
can do
cover.
it.
Yeah, I'll do them in the cover. But I could
Yeah,
see
I'll do them in
them
the
on
cover,
the,
but
on
not
the
not
interior
on an interior
wraps.
wrap.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just too. Basically, the cover is the eye appeal, so
Mhm.
that's the one you want to be tightly sealed.
Yep.
Yep.
Is it the case that all books from all eras and publishers can be deacidified, but only some can be cleaned with a surfactant, or are there some eras publishers that should never touch water altogether? I will say the use of a surfactant is something that I've actually been fairly liberal with on my channel. If you study the conservation literature, you will learn that it's actually frowned upon to just universally use surfactants. The idea is a document should be deacidified and just cleaned with a buffer water. And then a surfactant should only be used if necessary.
Yep.
I tend to use it really only universally if I have stains, because I have found that water alone almost never lifts, even tide marks, which theoretically were made by water alone. Almost never water alone will work on that. So I'll use a surfactant. I think it's best practice to not use a surfactant unless you need it. That said, again, I'll admit that I use surfactants fairly regularly. But if you watch my channel, you know that I use a tiny amount of surfactant. I mean, I'm talking 1 drop of Tritenex 100 per 100 mLs of water.
Yep.
And that I calculated based on the critical micelle size of the Tritenex 100. So that is an amount that is effective. I think if you are just squirting Dawn dish soap or something else in, you are my opinion is that is not best practice. So that addresses part of this question. The other part is, are there books that are safe for aqueous bath versus not? I think the general consensus is Golden Age, pretty safe to put in a pH buffered water. Anything Atomic Age and newer, there's some risks, especially if it's previously been exposed to water.
Yep.
Thoughts, guys?
Yep. Yeah, no, I was just going to comment. The weakest paper I've ever seen come across so far is DC Silver Age, and also the stuff that's already been pre-exposed to moisture. So once the sizing is gone from that paper, the ink is staying basically in that paper by gravity, and and it will wash right out. And I actually, for surfactant use, when I mix it, I'm using even less than you do, Dr. Paul. I mix my washes by the gallon. I have a glass, container, and I use 6 to 8 drops in that entire gallon so it's very minimal surfactant.
When you start being really exact, even a drop is not a drop is not a drop. It literally, the size of a drop varies with respect to the orifice from which you deliver it. So I go into this kind of level of detail in my videos, but I think that level, anything more than that, in my opinion, is not best practice. So, but that level is fairly safe. Now, you've seen me also, if you watch the channel, you've seen me have some significant ink loss on Silver Age books. And I will say Silver Age books can be a bear, especially if they've already been exposed to some
Moisture
humidity or
or something.
some water. And I agree with you, Larry. They're both susceptible, but I think DCs tend to be easier to lose ink on.
Yep.
Yeah.
The paper's worse.
Yeah. I'm going to highlight this. Ben says, related question, is the sizing in Silver Age books actually water soluble? Sizing, really interesting. Technically, the Silver Age books were internally sized. I should say the paper was internally sized during manufacturing. Sizing is interesting in that it is water soluble when it is applied. And then when it dries, it repels water, so it is hydrophobic, but enough water with enough time can overcome the hydrophobicity.
Exactly.
And then can resolubilize it.
Mm-hmm.
My rule of thumb is, and this actually is something, I'm glad you brought this question up, because there was a question in the Facebook group recently about resizing pages. And I put a video out that I combined in one video, what I called best practices for deacidification, cleaning, and resizing. And I think some people have watched that video and they think I meant you should do all three of these every time, which is not what I intended from the video. I very rarely resize paper from a comic book anymore. Firstly, they don't usually need it. So how do you know when paper needs to be resized, when the sizing has been removed? It will be floppy. It will not have stiffness like paper should have. If you go like this in the wind, you can hear paper. It's snappy. When you do that with a paper towel, you don't hear it, right? Because it's floppy. It'll feel like that. Also, similar to a paper towel, if you put a tiny drop of water on the surface of the paper, it should bead up. If it immediately soaks in and spreads, like on a paper towel, then the sizing is shot. And if that's the case, then you should resize it, or you should consider resizing it. If you are going to resize it in an aqueous bath, then the method I described would be a way to do that. But frankly, since I put that video out, Phil doesn't do it that way. He brushes sizing on. The professor, Peter Alachi, also brushes it on. I think that's a better method. Captain Larry, you've also experimented with brushing it on. I think that's a better method. I should put up a follow-up video with brushing sizing on. I would look at Flying L. I would actually look at
Peters.
Sorry, Professor, I'm forgetting the name of your channel. I think it's called Experiments in Conservation. I would look at the professor's channel for that, and also Captain Larry's. And I know, Phil, that's how you do it too, although I don't think you have public video out there on that.
No.
I've done experiments with doing full submersion in methylcellulose, drying it, different techniques, and I found all of them work well, but the submersion is more difficult.
It is. I freely admit that.
Yeah, I have switched to brushing sizing. I do not ever do center wraps, cover only. That's it.
Yeah. So just for historic perspective, I put that out because there were other conservators publishing videos where they were adding methylcellulose to the wash and they weren't even solubilizing it. And so that video was more a response to, hey, if you're doing it that way, you're literally not accomplishing anything. If you do want to aqueous baths resize something, here is how one would do it. That said, like I said, I don't think it's best practice. I think it's better to surface resize. Vulu says, I'm new, but I see CGC site lists some leaf casting under conservation repairs. What is the threshold from conserved to restored when it comes to leaf casting? Leaf casting, if done correctly with archival materials and professional results, is considered conservation, not restoration, in any amount.
Yeah, that's correct.
Jason says, should a wet clean with a surfactant always include calcium hydroxide, or are there other times that a wash with a surfactant by itself is enough? I will just go out on a limb here and say, actually, every wash you do with water on a comic book page, cover, any piece of paper, frankly, should include calcium hydroxide. It should be buffered water.
Yep.
You should not use any other waters. You should not use non-buffered water. In particular, I will go out on a bit of a limb here, and I'm going to actually put together a video for my channel on this. You should not ever put a page from a comic book in distilled water. You should not use distilled water on paper. Why? Because paper is manufactured in water with water. That water is buffered. It has calcium hydroxide and other ions. It has calcium and other ions. When you use distilled water on that paper, it literally rips those ions from the paper and it leaves the paper weaker. It may not show up today, but it will show up over time. You should never use distilled water. This is one of my issues with the HOP method as it was described in the stain removal and whitening book that we had Jim on 2 episodes ago to talk about.
You mean specifically just distilled water? Like
right. Sorry.
So
yeah.
okay
I mean, you may use distilled water as a base to which you add calcium hydroxide.
Yeah.
You use it as a base to which you add calcium hydroxide plus surfactant, etc. That would be if you have city water, for example, and it's chlorinated.
Exactly.
I happen to be out in the country. I have a well. The area here is known as the Texas Hill Country. It's literally limestone filtered water. So I already have hard water. It comes out of the tap without any chlorine and with a pH of about 8. So I add to that a little bit more calcium hydroxide to buffer it correctly. But if you have city water, yes, you start with distilled water, to which you add your calcium hydroxide. Never treat your paper in pure distilled water. And also, I would never treat it in water that was non-buffered that had a surfactant in it. Anything to add on that, guys?
No, actually, you summed it up very well. Yeah, because basically, if you're going to deacidify something, that calcium hydroxide is very important to take it out. And that's the reason we wet clean.
There's
take it out.
There's peer-reviewed papers in the conservation literature where they provide evidence that distilled water destroys paper. I'll say weakens it, and then accelerates its destruction, because the paper we're dealing with, this newsprint, it's destroying itself already, and so now you're accelerating that if you're bathing it in distilled water. Not a good thing. I'm going to keep just popping some of these questions in. Ben says, can you get a blue label on a resized book, or will it always be conserved or purple label?
It depends on how. If you turn it into a piece of cardboard, you're going to get a purple label.
I think this is I think this is one where it's tough to have a official position on it. I think you can get away with quite a bit with resizing. There is no absolute rule here, though, that you can resize anything anytime. But I think experiment with it. Start conservative, and I think you'll find it is very difficult for CGC to detect it if you are using it conservatively, is the best way for me to put it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well said.
Yeah, I agree.
What are some publishers to look out for when it comes to ink runoff when doing a wet clean? My rule of thumb here is just do not stay in the water very long. I've cut my washes down to 2 to 3 minutes tops. I'll try to do them in 2. I think you're removing most of the dirt in that short period of time. You're removing tanning and other contaminants. You're deacidifying the paper. I don't like brilliant white pages. I would rather have them be slightly tanned. and a little bit creamy. That's how they were manufactured. I like that look. I just don't leave them in water very often. I also tend to not put things in my bath that I am not comfortable leaving in the book. The one exception is surfactant. If I use a surfactant, I will rinse it out once. So I'm down to like 2-minute washes is sufficient for most highly tanned pages. 3 if it's necessary. And I'm holding it to 2 to 3 minutes. When I do that, very rarely see ink run off. Now, we will sometimes see ink fleck off. That is the phenomenon we talked about more with Silver Age books, especially those that have undergone already some exposure to water. But rarely do I see actual ink run off in that period of time. Comments?
I do not like DC Silver Age for this.
Yeah, it's rough. I mean, some channels just don't even do them. If you guys notice, there's some channels that just won't even try because it's rough.
Yeah, because I've seen some that when they go into the tank, and you can almost immediately see a color change to the fluid, and it's not from the deacidification or turning brown. You can see color. Stop right there. Empty out that fluid. Get rid of it, because all you're doing is asking for trouble if you're going anything further than that.
Yeah, all I can think of is a sad story. I mean, one of my colleagues, Kenny Sanderson, has been posting a lot of books he's been getting from another conservator who's no longer doing the work, who long and short really kind of got in over his head, and early on was doing work on books that he shouldn't have been doing. He didn't have the skill set. And one of those books that I got from him right now that we covered in the show earlier is a Flash Comics 1 that he like took all the colors out of the cover. And it's just such a sad thing to see, because it's something that should never have happened, especially from a professional. And it just goes to show, like, especially with washes, it's like you're not playing. Like if you don't know what you're doing, you don't just, especially on something of value, you don't just go at it. Like this is you'll. I mean, when you guys are talking about the wash cycles being 2 to 3 minutes, you know how easy it is to overdo that if you don't. A 15-minute wash, a 30-minute wash. People that are washing things for hours, it's like, oh my god.
No.
Yeah. Guys, let's hop into a couple of. Let's answer a couple questions here.
I need to remind everybody I'm in Hawaii on vacation, and I made a promise to the ladies that I wouldn't be excessively online for too long.
Yeah.
All right.
They're outside the door waiting to go to the pool.
Why don't we hit a couple of comments here, and then we can wrap up, and we'll get back to, we'll leave the questions for the next Q&A session. So Shelby says, I think brushed on resizing would fall under regloss and detectable. I disagree with you, Shelby.
I disagree with that as well.
It's done carefully. It's not detectable. And by that, we're saying using the right materials and the right amounts. Ben says, I have artesian well water. It's almost perfect for making coffee. Mine too. It's so yummy. Apparently also for aqueous bath. We're fortunate in that we have that. Shelby says, I'm glad most of our answers are aligning, but it's from what I learned, and you gave me the courage to do this. Very kind of you to say. You are doing great work, and we appreciate you.
Shelby's doing great.
Adrift says 2 to 3 minutes for both cover and interiors. As a rule, yes, Jason. Yes. However, interior pages, much more forgiving. If you are busy and you let those baths go 5 minutes, not a problem on interior pages. I would keep it real tight on covers, though. JCP says, oh, by the way, thanks for joining, JCP, and for the comment. Do you all use methyl cellulose as brush on resizing? And if so, is it more diluted than when you used as a glue? I think, Phil, you taught me to do this, and you use the same concentration as when you make it for glue.
What? I mean, I don't want to give away too much of exactly how I do it, but I'll just say, like, you're not globbing this on and just kind of wiping and smearing. I mean, you have to be very conservative in how much you're putting on. It's better to put on and say, "Oh, I need more," than to just gob it on the paper.
So you absolutely can dilute it further.
Yeah.
And I would start conservative.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Captain Larry, do you have your pressing drying technique in a video? Need to try that for sure. He does. Yeah.
I do.
Sure does.
Like I said, I
but the
learned it
problem
from
is
him.
I don't remember which video it is.
You'll have to
Watch
go-
all my videos. How's that? Yeah.
The
No,
link is
I
in the
did.
description for Flying L Comics.
Yeah, I did do it. It's in one of the chapters for one of the books, and I apologize. I can't remember which one it is. And
The
I
professors
probably
agree-
really should make a new one.
Yeah, maybe we should tag that and highlight it for folks.
Yeah.
The professor's agreeing with me. Resizing isn't reglossing. You had a little sheen. It's not noticeable. And again, undetectable by CGC. Shout out for Phil for his outstanding work and great community relations. I spread the word about his skills all around Florida. All right.
Appreciate you appreciating me. I do what I can when I can.
Absolutely. We are really fortunate to have Phil and Captain Larry. And I also count us very fortunate to have this great audience. Thank you, all the viewers, especially our donators, Ben and Cap One Superman,
especially
donated a second time. So the next 2 weeks are already locked in now for
commercial free,
ad free. Yeah.
Great.
So thanks to those guys. Again, I'm humbled and appreciate everything. Guys, safe travels. Enjoy yourselves. Enjoy your families. And everybody enjoy the Labor Day long weekend. I hope you got a long weekend. I hope you take a moment to think about the sacrifices that were made so that we would have the rights and protections we have as workers in this country. So thanks again, everybody. Until next time, take care of one another.
All right. See you later, everybody.
I love that.